In 1953, a classified U.S. government program was quietly approved at the highest levels of power. No public record, no congressional oversight, no ethical review board. Its stated goal: to understand the human mind well enough to control it. What actually happened was something nobody planned for, and the files that document it were ordered to be destroyed. Most of them were, but not all of them. What survived tells a story so disturbing that when a U.S. Senate committee finally reviewed the remaining documents in 1977, seasoned politicians, people who had seen everything, sat in silence. This is that story. And you were never supposed to hear it. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand the world these men lived in. It's 1950. The Korean War has just begun. American POWs are coming home from Chinese and Soviet captivity, and they're different, broken in ways that combat alone doesn't explain. Some have renounced their own country on camera. Some can't remember months of their captivity at all. Washington calls it brainwashing. And suddenly, the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world has a single obsessive question. If they can do it to our soldiers, can we do it to theirs? The answer they were looking for had a name: MKUltra. Officially, it was a CIA research program. In reality, it was 150 separate sub-projects running simultaneously inside universities, hospitals, prisons, and military bases, without the knowledge of the subjects inside them. The scope was breathtaking. The methods were unthinkable. And its director, a man named Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist from New York with a clubfoot and a passion for folk dancing, would spend the next 2 decades doing things to human beings that violated every principle medicine and law had ever established. He reported directly to the CIA director. Nobody else was watching. The early experiments seemed almost mundane by what would come later. Subjects, many of them prisoners, psychiatric patients, and soldiers who had volunteered under conditions that made refusal nearly impossible, were given experimental doses of mescaline, barbiturates, and amphetamines. Researchers watched, took notes, moved on. Then, in 1951, a package arrived from Sandoz Pharmaceuticals in Switzerland. Inside, a compound so new it didn't even have a street name yet: lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. Gottlieb was convinced it was the key: a truth serum, a control mechanism, a weapon. He ordered it tested on everyone, and he meant everyone. Patients in psychiatric hospitals were dosed without consent, sometimes for 77 consecutive days. A Kentucky rehab facility ran continuous LSD experiments on inmates for over 2 years straight. CIA operatives were secretly dosed at office parties to study reactions in natural settings. But the experiment that crossed every line, the one that haunts the program's legacy most, happened in a small hotel room in New York City in November 1953. Frank Olson was a U.S. Army biochemist, a mild-mannered scientist, a father of 3. He had attended a CIA retreat where, without his knowledge, his drink was laced with LSD. The trip broke something in him. 9 days later, Frank Olson fell from a 13th floor window of the Statler Hotel. The CIA called it a suicide. His family called it murder. And when his body was exhumed in 1994, 4 decades later, the forensic evidence was unambiguous. Frank Olson had been knocked unconscious before he ever went through that window. The government settled with his family for $750,000. No one was ever charged. Pause. Ambient sound only for 3 seconds. But here's what most documentaries stop covering, because what came next was worse. MKUltra wasn't just about LSD. That's the version history remembers, because it's the version that's easiest to explain. The sub-projects that never make the headlines involved sensory deprivation chambers, subjects locked in total darkness and silence for days, emerging unable to form coherent sentences. Hypnotic suggestion trials attempting to create what the documents called courier amnesia, the ability to implant information in a person's mind that they themselves couldn't consciously access or betray under interrogation. There were programs testing the viability of induced paralysis, induced fear responses tied to specific triggers, radio frequency experiments on the brain. One sub-project, MKUltra Project 68, was run out of a Montreal hospital by a Scottish-American psychiatrist named Ewan Cameron. Cameron believed he could de-pattern a human mind, essentially erase a person's existing personality and rebuild it from scratch. He called it psychic driving. What it actually involved was putting patients, people who came to him seeking help for depression and anxiety, into medically induced comas lasting weeks at a time, while recorded messages played on a loop into their ears. Thousands of repetitions, every day. Some patients lost decades of memory. Some forgot their own children's names. Some never recovered. Cameron was not a rogue actor. He was the sitting president of the World Psychiatric Association while he ran these experiments. He was funded directly by the CIA. He died in 1967, on a hiking trip, celebrated in his field. His patients are still trying to get answers. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the bulk of MKUltra's files destroyed. He knew the Senate investigations were coming. What he didn't know was that a batch of documents had been misfiled in a financial records building, not the main archive. Those 20,000 files survived. They were discovered during a Freedom of Information Act request in 1977. And when Senator Ted Kennedy's subcommittee finally held public hearings, the lead CIA witness admitted, on record, that the program's goal had been total psychological control of a human subject. Not treatment, not research, control. The program was officially shut down in 1973. Officially. But here's the question the documents can't answer. The sub-projects that were destroyed, the ones Helms made sure never survived, what were those? We know 150 sub-projects existed. The recovered files document roughly a third of them in any meaningful detail. The other two-thirds? We have names. We have budget line items. We have the shadows of experiments that someone decided the world should never know about. Frank Olson's son, Eric, has spent 50 years pursuing his father's case. He believes the full story, the version that would explain why his father had to die, is still classified. As of today, he has not been proven wrong. MKUltra is the experiment history admits to, because it had to. The question Forgotten Signal keeps returning to is simple. What happens to the programs that never get a Senate hearing? The ones where no files survive? The ones where the subjects never made it home to tell anyone what happened? We're going to find out. Next week, we're pulling a thread that connects a Cold War-era military base, a series of unexplained mass disappearances, and a facility that officially never existed. The coordinates are real. The people are real. The silence around them is loud. Subscribe. And don't miss it. The signal doesn't wait.